I'm going to breeze through the slides. Since we got a small group, I definitely want to get a lot of feedback. If you guys have any questions or want to go over anything that I'm going to talk about, please feel free to jump in. So real quick about us, we are a DoD contractor, primarily working with DoD. We do a little bit of public sector, but 90% of our focus is on the DoD. So from a lot of what you've seen throughout the other presentations, you're going to notice that our focus is a little bit different. Public sector versus DoD on records management specifically is very, very different. We've got different compliance. We've got different ideas that we've got to talk through. A little bit about what we do. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but again, they're very DoD-centric. So within the DoD, records management is something that for 90% of the entities in the DoD, they still do this in file cabinets and they still do it on spreadsheets. They've got a lot of compliance requirements that they've got to do, mostly based around DoD 5015.2, but for them, a solution-based records management platform is very new. So that was a great opportunity for us. It really allowed us to kind of come in with a product suite like Alfresco and really give them an idea of what they can do to make the work life easier for their records managers. One of the things that we're doing is we're actually engaging in helping them define how a records management solution comes to bear, how it can engage the records managers, and how we can do a lot of things with them to evolve records management. We're actually on the Records Managers Working Group. We work with the DoD CIO. We're also working with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and I'll get into a lot of that later. But from this side, the big things to pick up are primarily records management is still done the old-fashioned way. They've got huge file cabinets. They've got people that walk around these file cabinets, picking up records, physically picking them up, physically looking through them. They've got spreadsheets, which are very, very basic catalogs of records that are in the system. And they really, really spend a lot of time doing non-records management activities, just going to the file cabinets, just looking through their spreadsheets. So for them, the ability to kind of have a solution is key. The new solutions, there's a lot of retrofit solutions. One of the reasons why Alfresco was so great for us was because records management was baked in at the beginning. It's not something that was tacked on to a Documentum or to an open text. Alfresco really built records management in the same repository, using the same tools, using the same interface. So that was a huge sell for them, and it was really, really key for them to streamline the workload so they don't have to learn 3 different systems. And then lastly, within the records management, now that they're getting the ability to use solutions, they're starting to find a lot of the issues that they've had. They're starting to find out that their taxonomies don't exist. They're starting to find out that file plans and disposition schedules really are in the head of somebody, and when he looks at his spreadsheet, he tries to figure out exactly what his file plan is. So he might have separate spreadsheets for different file plans, different disposition schedules, different retention schedules, those sorts of things. And right now, they don't have automated discovery. So, I know Alfresco is not an e-discovery platform, but one of the really interesting things was that they looked at Alfresco and the small bit of record search that they had, and they really thought of that as an e-discovery platform. So within the DoD, I think the next big field for them is A, taxonomies, and really B, getting an e-discovery tool that can look out across all of their different repositories, looking through the records management and helping them find things. So from within the records management for the DoD, DoD 5015.2 is the standard for them. So similar to a Sarbanes-Oxley, similar to some company policies that they've got, DoD 5015.2 defines how records management has to be done. And they must define and maintain a file plan. So within the records managers categories, they've got to be able to define what the criteria are for the different disposition schedules, what the criteria are for defining a record. Some of that is covered, but it's really up to the individual agencies how they're going to handle that. They have to have a content discovery. Right now, really what that is a person looking through a spreadsheet, looking through some basic metadata that they might have put in, and really just understanding all of the different documents that they've got. Content discovery from an Alfresco side gives them a whole new landscape of things that they can kind of take a look at. And anytime you're moving from a very paper-based, very process-based into an automated solution, it's got to make their jobs easier. We all know if you're from America and you understand all the different things that have been going on at the federal level, you'll understand that right now they're trying to do more with less. They've got records managers. The records managers are hugely oversaturated with what they can do, and any solution that comes in has to be able to streamline that process, has to help them collect better metadata, has to help them categorize and maintain their records. Another key thing for them is interoperability. They've got records everywhere. Some of the things that you wouldn't even think about as records, but we saw in the presentation this morning, were posts to Twitter, posts to Facebook. If you are at an 06 or above level, everything you do that's public facing has to be a record. So for them, one of the things that we saw this morning that was really, really key for me from a 4.2 perspective is when a person posts something to Facebook, that can automatically be captured by the system. It can automatically be declared as a record. So a lot of those features are really key. Interoperability, being able to see across many repositories, being able to see how a repository comes in, so being able to pull in some of that information. If you guys got to see anything that Gab did, the interactivity or the ability to kind of use CMIS and chemistry was another thing that we're really excited about. And cost effective. Right now, the big guys, the Documentums, the OpenText, the SharePoint with their record center, they're very expensive. And again, going back to the government and trying to do more with less, the cost savings for us bringing in Alfresco, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, but for them to modernize their existing system versus us doing a full deployment with Alfresco was about the same cost. So the licensing fees going forward are about 60% less. So being able to do more with less is really key, and Alfresco gave us the ability to make a strong use case to bring them the savings that they need. So what we're doing, so STOPSO as a company partnered with SPAWAR, and SPAWAR is another government entity, to deploy out a solution to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The Joint Chiefs of Staff are the ones that deploy policy. They deploy instructions. They basically define what all of the branches of the DoD do. So everything kind of starts with the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And for us, from a strategic perspective, getting in with the Joint Chiefs of Staff was huge. We're working with them on helping to develop a policy. And actually Tuesday, we had a meeting with the DoD CIO and the Joint Chiefs, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and they're looking at deploying a strategy for an enterprise service for the DoD. Understanding that most of the other folks don't have a solution, we think we're well positioned to take what we're doing for the Joint Chiefs and push it out as an enterprise service, so that all of the services, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and all of the combatant commands will actually adopt this solution. So what we did was we developed an RM solution, and it actually goes past RM, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my after lunch session, how the larger scope of this product works. We deployed a solution, multiple repositories, building out a fully scalable solution to help the Joint Chiefs understand what they're doing with the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the combatant commands. It is the only open source solution in the DoD providing 5015.2, so that was a huge benefit for Alfresco. And you know, if you're familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley, and I think the guys talked about it on the first day, this is not something that is, it's not something that is a nice to have, it is something that has to have. And so from an open source solution, Alfresco was the only player out there. So it made it an easy choice for us. It also made it a really easy choice for the Joint Chiefs to adopt this product. Some of the things that we're doing with them are we're deploying a reference architecture. So we're going to define a solution, how it interoperates, how that solution is available, how the solution can scale to meet needs. And we're going to deploy this reference architecture in a new cloud service that the DoD is working on called the JIE, which is a Joint Integrated Environment. So one of the things that you guys saw is the scalability of the product, some of the solutions for interconnecting multiple repositories. Alfresco's got some great capabilities in there, and we're definitely leveraging those as we go. And then the next is the taxonomy working group. The taxonomy working group really gives us the ability to define and understand how that metadata works. And this goes back to some e-discovery pieces. So the taxonomy defines the metadata. The metadata gets captured by Alfresco, and then it gets deployed out into multiple solutions so that everybody's using the same taxonomy. One of the issues that they've got in the DoD right now is that every group, every command, every branch, every division gets to define whatever they want. There's really no standards right now. So from a taxonomy working group, what we're doing is we're working with the capabilities that Alfresco provides as far as the content model, as far as aspects, as far as file types, to really understand how we can drive better taxonomy so that when they're developing records, when they're categorizing records, we're doing it in a consistent way across all of our different deployments. And so far you can see, we've got a lot of participants. We've got the Joint Staff, we've got the DoD CIO, and we've got Cybercom. And so from Cybercom's perspective, for those of you that kind of follow the federal landscape, there's been a lot of issues with information getting out that really shouldn't. So Cybercom came on board and was really interested in this and helping to protect their data. So not only helping to understand and categorize their records, but also helping to protect the data as it comes in, as it gets stored. We can also filter access so that people aren't getting access to information that they shouldn't have. So suitability. From a suitability perspective, Alfresco is definitely an interesting play. Open source in the government is a little bit of a misnomer. The government does like open source, but they like open source when they can control it, when they can trust it. So, and I'm not going to get an open source. I'm also in the Military Open Source Solutions Board, and I'm a huge proponent of open source. I've been working with open source for about the last 12 to 15 years. So open source is sort of a pet project for me, but it's very, very hard in the government. There's very few people that are actually willing. They like the idea that an IBM can come in. They like the idea that a Documentum can come in. Brings with it all of that credibility, brings with it all that suitability that they really want. So for us, one of the biggest issues was getting them to understand that an open source solution does give you security, it does give you suitability, and it does take away a lot of the concerns that you would have about a project. And so if you heard this morning, there are two different models to open source. There's community-led and there's corporate-led. You heard a little bit of the differences there. From a DoD perspective, corporate-led is really a little bit easier to sell. So the fact that Alfresco followed a corporate-led model was really a benefit for us. They have a controlled environment. They manually review all of the different pieces that come in, so you don't get code that is unreviewed, or you don't get patches that would introduce new security. So the corporate-led model was very, very interesting. One of the other things that we're doing is we're working with the Trusted Code Initiative at the Open Source Software Institute. So that's a very small group out of Mississippi, and we're working to get Alfresco included in the Trusted Code Initiative. We've gone through a review procedure with them. They've actually accepted it as a candidate, and we're going to work with them to actually get a baseline. So what that then provides is that provides a little bit more security for all the different folks in the DoD to actually accept that this has been reviewed by an impartial third party. They've determined its credibility, they've determined its suitability, and they've also reviewed the procedures for how this solution comes about. So again, this is sort of fighting the fight that you only see on the DoD. It takes a little bit on the corporate side as well, but it just gives us the ability to say that Alfresco is an enterprise-ready, a DoD-ready solution. Some of the other things that they've got is the DoD doesn't, while they love the idea that an IBM, a Microsoft, an EMC can come in, they don't like the fact that they're giving up the access to their data rights. They don't like the fact that they're giving the intellectual property to somebody else for what they deliver. So that's one of the benefits that open source provides. And from an Alfresco perspective, because they're an open source, even on the enterprise side, the ability for us to say that you maintain all of your open source rights, you maintain all of the additions that you add, and this can be deployed out to as many people as you want without having to get engaged in any of the activities that you would with a Microsoft for licensing deals, for them to maintain that solution going on. It really gives them a power of control and the ownership of what we're doing for them. Another one was the ability to scale. From an open source model, there's a lot of open source products that say they can scale that really can't. that want you to believe that scalability is baked in. With Alfresco, it really is, and one of the things was their Alfresco cloud that they've got. We showed them the cloud. We helped them understand the number of users that they've got, the partitioning that they can do, you know, all of the different pieces that the cloud provides, and really got them to understand that this is a fully scalable solution. And this is something that you can push out to as many different people as you can get on board. And that kind of leads us into the enterprise services that we're doing as well. So the JIE that I talked about before, that is the government's closed cloud. It is a cloud that they're building out in their data centers. And so this will go into that cloud environment. And the long-term goal for that is that this is going to be a fully, massively scaled, probably on par with what they're doing with Alfresco Cloud, possibly bigger. The long-term solution as an enterprise service, we're looking at about 400,000 to 600,000 records managers accessing this system. And we're looking at probably somewhere in the neighborhood of about 85 to 100 different nodes that we're going to run on for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and all of their different commands within that. The idea of offline and local instances, you saw a little bit of that with the hybrid side that they've got. And one of the things that we're working with Alfresco is to understand how we can leverage some of those capabilities so that you can start a workflow, you can start tasks in one entity. You can move them over to another entity, and you can bring them back when they're done. So for especially for the services, the Army, Navy, and Air Force, they like to have their box. They understand cloud, they like the idea of cloud, but they still want to know that while the information is in their control, that they have access to it and they can go and physically touch it. So the hybrid side of that is really important for us as well. And last but not least, really, this was one of the key things from a suitability perspective was the DoD believes that everything they do is so completely different from what everybody does in the corporate side. They want to believe that there is nothing in the corporate world that really compares to what the DoD is doing. So they wanted something that was completely customizable, where the security can be owned and controlled by them, and where they can have access that if there's a security patch, if there's a vulnerability that comes out, they don't have to wait for somebody else to do it. From a customization perspective, I don't know if anybody's ever tried to work with a Microsoft or an IBM on customizations. It's very hard. Even though they provide open APIs and they provide a lot, you still have to go back to them and work with them on customizations, especially when you're talking about some of the core aspects of the application. And from a security perspective, waiting for a security patch from Microsoft for 6 months just isn't an option for the DoD. So with the DoD's perspective, they can go in and they can actually patch it themselves. They can get access to the source code. They can find the vulnerability. They can patch it in a matter of days versus waiting for an enterprise to deploy a patch within a matter of months. So all of these really were suitability elements, but they were really our key selling factors as we went to the DoD. We spent a lot of time. We spent probably 4 to 6 months with them before we even deployed the solution to really talk through, understand what were their hot buttons, understand why did you make this choice to go open source. And these were what we came up with as far as the selling points and really what they wanted to see in the solution. So as far as a case study, we had a great sponsor. And I will say I've worked in the DoD most of my entire life. I was in the Navy. I was a civilian for the Navy for a while. I was a civilian for the Army. I've worked as a contractor the rest of my life. So I have been in the DoD community. And I can honestly say that you don't find a lot of people in the DoD community that are willing to even consider open source, especially at the highest levels. So Major General Bowman, a 3-star Joint Staff J6, so he is the CIO for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's very progressive, and he was really the right person for us to start this engagement with because he understood open source. He's been around it enough versus going to somebody that's not a CIO level that really wouldn't understand open source. So Major General Bowman was very, very key for us in understanding how we could bring an open source solution in. And he also had a grand vision of taking this small project that we've started and actually blowing it out to an enterprise level. So you can see some of the key characteristics: scalable, robust platform without the need for resource-intensive customizations. Our deployment is 80% Alfresco. So we're using Share. We're using all of the capabilities of Alfresco. We're actually on the 4.1 branch right now, but we're evaluating 4.2, and there's a lot of great features in 4.2 that we're very interested in. But it is a platform that gives us the ability to build out from there. So there's customizations we can do without having to go back and rebuild the whole thing. So we're using a pretty vanilla Alfresco, but we've done a lot of customizations, especially from the idea of being able to build in these components that they feel are very specific to them. It is cloud enabled, and it does have an ability to integrate with other task and records managements. So we're actually building out a set of services that will allow us to talk to a SharePoint, that will allow us to bring tasks in from an HP system called Trim, move those tasks seamlessly into Alfresco, work them in Alfresco, and move them out as we do this 2 to 3 year transition. And you can see some of the features that allow you to do that. So CMIS. CMIS is very, very interesting from a migration perspective, bringing data in, but it also is the foundation for what we're doing to move things back and forth. SharePoint Web Services. So I talked a little bit about that this morning. There is some basic SharePoint Web Service integration right now. We are actually going to build out a few different pieces that will allow them to declare something in SharePoint, continue to live in SharePoint, but be seen as a record inside of Alfresco. And that's a really, really interesting thing. Tasker integration services is something that they've got from a DoD perspective. That is really what their interoperability looks like, but it really doesn't work right now. It's more of a misnomer for them in that it makes them feel good that some of these vendor systems can interact. And then obviously OASIS standards. The fact that they're an open source body, a third-party body that are defining these characteristics. So component-wise, the software platform greatly reduced total cost of ownership. With a no per user cost, it allows them to get action officers into the system to do certain pieces of it, but these people might only use it for 15 minutes a week. They may only use it 2 months out of the year. So a per user cost is a huge deal for them. They're paying for a SharePoint license for somebody that over the course of the entire year may only use it for a week. So the ability of the solution to grow as usage increases and only pay licenses based off of that was very, very big. Rapid deployment, if you guys got to listen to Gab's thing last night, rapid deployment is at the heart of Alfresco. It really gives you the ability to take an idea and run it through and get it out to the customer very quickly. Collaboration, we talked a lot about that, but the ability to drive innovation through direct access to the code was key as well. So it doesn't require us to send somebody out to learn an entire suite of applications. If you know Spring, if you understand some of the Alfresco APIs, with about 2 weeks of training from Alfresco, you can have somebody up and ready to go and be able to drive capabilities. And the fast response, that's one of the big keys for open source. The ability to get something out in the community, to get feedback, to bring it back into the solution, and then deploy it out to the customers very quickly. So from that perspective, we also get to be part of that community. So we as a customer, and anybody that's deployed Alfresco, you'll understand, you get to work directly with the Alfresco folks. It's not like Microsoft where I've got to bring in a consultant, send them to 3 weeks of working with the joint staff. We get to be those conduits. We get to work from a community perspective, and we get to kind of drive the new features, and that was very, very interesting for us. So the platform, fully open source platform, based on Alfresco Enterprise Content Management. We replaced an EMC Documentum and a Metastorm solution. So we were able to take 2 different products and with Alfresco combine them together, one consistent look and feel, one consistent interface for the users. We are taking Cognos and we're getting rid of Cognos from a BI and from a reporting perspective. We're bringing in JasperSoft, so again, another open source product, same licensing model as Alfresco. We're taking a huge Oracle database and we're going to segregate different pieces out. The pieces that we're going to use are going to go to Postgres, so another open source solution from Enterprise DB. And we're going to eventually engulf all that Oracle does, but the Oracle transition is going to take us a lot longer. And then for single sign-on, so they're moving from Microsoft Active Directory, and we're moving into a Shibboleth single sign-on community. We're using OpenSAML, and we're going to use an identity provider and authorization provider, including an LDAP, from Shibboleth itself. So the entire suite is going to be Shibboleth, Postgres, Jaspersoft, and Alfresco. It'll be the first enterprise service across the entire DoD that's ever been built on an entirely open source platform. And so for us, that was very interesting. So from a value and benefits, you know, a lot of these things are based on numbers. A lot of these things are based on what the sponsor defines as their value and their benefits. One of the keys was to reduce cost savings, not only from a upfront licensing model, but also from an O&M perspective. You can see the 40% cost savings year after year is going to be very big for them. But one of the things I mentioned earlier that was really interesting, and one of the things that I think kind of crosses the DoD to corporate barrier, was they had about their Documentum and Metastorm application was about 10 years old. And they knew they had to do some modernization for it. And they'd kind of gone out to some vendors, and they've gotten a little bit of information as to how that was going to work. And they got a price tag of somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 to $6 million to do that, which sounds like a lot to us, but to the DoD, it's actually not terribly bad. What we did was we came in with the open source side, and we worked with General Bowman. We kind of helped him understand that not only can we do this, we can get your licensing, we can get all of the development costs associated with bringing in a new solution, and we can do it for that same $4 million. So we're not taking what they did already. We basically are starting from scratch. Because of all the different features that I went over before, we're able to deploy a brand new solution with a modern interface, with all of the features they were looking for the same cost as it was going to take them to modernize. Then on top of that, they're going to save 40% year over year to be able to have this solution because of all the different savings that we've got them. The modernization costs, we have since the initial time, we've actually streamlined a lot of their processes. So some of the things that we were able to do with Alfresco was we were able to streamline the interfaces. We were able to streamline a lot of what they've got, and we were able to save them 20%. So not only did we come in at the same price, we actually came in 20% less because of what Alfresco provided and being able to streamline it. The open API was big for us as developers, and that's really what led to the 20% savings. The task and integration is one combined solution, and the clear migration path for them as using OpenCMS and chemistry. And then the ability to scale was really big. If we look at scaling this out, one of the reasons why they've not been able to do a large enterprise service for records management was the cost. DISA tried to do something, and they went out and bought a ton of Microsoft licenses. They spent about $480 million, and then they realized that that wasn't even going to get them to their end. It was probably going to cost them somewhere in the neighborhood of about $700 million, and that just wasn't going to work. For our enterprise solution, we're looking at doing it for somewhere around 80. So it's going to be about a 5x cost savings for them as we start to scale this out to the enterprise. And that's all I've got as far as slides. I'm not sure where you guys are.
That's good. Thank you, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting case study on how somebody's deployed Alfresco records management to manage records. Now I want to move on and start looking at where we're going with records management and look at 2.1. And wanted to look at some of the biggest challenges, and this is what I've heard from talking to records managers. When you go to talk to records managers, they will talk about a whole range of different RM type features. So they'll talk about, you know, are you DoD certified, and that's very important, or are you MoRec certified, how do I define my file plan, and all of those. And in reality, most of that doesn't matter, because what you're going to find is that your end users aren't going to use the system, because records management isn't designed for the end user to allow them to do what they want to do. You're actually putting an extra level of load on the end user, asking them to go through and do the see how we can
Okay, so what I'll do is I'm just going to skim over at a quite high level some of the key features. I've already broken it. Which one do I want? Down arrow. There you go, you can tell. I'm only a software engineer. So I'm just going to go through some of the key features we added to 2.1, just as a high level, just to give you an idea of basically what we were thinking and why we did it. So the first thing we wanted to tackle was being able to declare records easily. We've seen historically with our products that it's very difficult to communicate to end users exactly when something should become a record, why it should become a record, and ultimately where they should put it once that decision's been made. So what we're trying to do with 2.1 is make that almost so easy that it's a non-issue for the user, and hopefully you kind of saw a bit of that this morning. So we've reduced it. If it is a manual process, it's reduced to a single-click operation in the user's working environment. But I suspect, as you would have seen this morning, that 9 times out of 10 that will actually be automated via rules for the user themselves. And what that gives us is the ability to do things what we're calling InPlace Records, where the records are actually blended into the user's working context. Now that's quite important as well, because although we may have a way of easily declaring records, we don't want those to kind of suddenly disappear from the user's view. You can imagine, users will be doing their daily job and working with content and collaborating, and at some point this content becomes important and goes under control. But they're still going to be working on maybe next month's figures or the month after's figures. So they need that information in their working context. They don't want to have to navigate into a file plan that may be in a structure that they necessarily don't understand. So that's where we have InPlace Records. And this diagram is trying to explain what we do is we kind of turn the what we'd normally consider like a folder document hierarchy upside down. So once it becomes a record, that record has two locations it lives. So to the end user, it kind of looks like we're taking a snapshot, or we're keeping another copy, or we're making a proxy or a kind of shell of the record in their environment, but we're not. And it's quite an important thing to sort of take away, is that we are only obviously storing that record once. We're just making it visible in 2 locations. So that sort of circumvents any issues about concerns of copying content, and keeping 2 copies of what was obviously something that should be under control. Okay, so that gives us the ability to say blend records into the user's working domain.
Question on that.
Yeah.
When you do that, is the record the specific version of the document or the whole collection of the versions of the document?
It is a snapshot of the version at the point at which the record was made. Yeah. I'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the end, because we've got some bits about how we will do versioning. Automated record classification. Obviously now we've kind of enabled the users and the content managers to kind of capture all these records really easily. The poor records management team are going to sort of get this influx of electronic records flowing into the file plan. So we don't want them to drown under this new kind of automated capture. So that's where we looked at how we could do automatic record classification, and that's all about using, again, these rules that the records management team can set up. Those rules are based on the characteristics of the record, so the types, the aspects, the properties, the time, and those rules will then automatically flow all the kind of, the good records, if you like, the records that we're expecting, into the right locations in the classification scheme. Now, obviously, that has a knock-on effect, because now we're capturing records easily, we're filing them easily, but we have to have thought out our file plan beforehand. But with the ability to dynamically construct the file plan, it means that necessarily not all of the file plan has to be fleshed out beforehand. The most the most obvious example of this is a periodic kind of type of record, maybe a financial record, where every month, you're going to want to capture all those monthly records into a single record folder and kind of cut that off and deal with it. And you don't want the records management team to be having to, construct next month's folder manually, wasting their time so that the records can flow through. So we, again, using rules and using kind of substitutions, again, based on the context of the record itself, we can actually dynamically construct areas of the file plan based on those records management rules. So again, we're going to get a bit further down the steps. So we've got the records flowing in, we've got bits of the file plan being created, but often records will flow into the system and they won't have all the information that's necessary to kind of glean its context. So that's where we have the notion of our intelligent record completion, where we can, again, pull on our rules automation, but also on workflow, to kind of gather data sensibly from the metadata on the original object, from people that were involved in the creation of that content in the first place, and again, from the context that we find ourselves. So again, we can kind of use the tools that we get in core Alfresco to kind of gather all that information easily for the records management team. Again, a lot of these features are fundamentally about allowing the users to do their job, but also allowing the records management team to do what they need to do with the minimum impact. I mean, you don't want to have to train or, you know, a bunch of records managers about how you're managing content in your authoring environment necessarily. Okay, so these kind of use of workflows and intelligent capture means that we can minimize that requirement. Now, obviously, you know, it's not a perfect world. They are going to receive records that may be incomplete, may make no sense, may not have all the context that's required. So we can help, again, help the records management team to automate the common exceptions, again, using rules. But we can do a lot of this automatically. So we can automatically throw records back if we know that, you know, we should never be, for example, I don't know, capturing an image that's being captured, you know, by somebody personally. So we can throw those back, or we can, again, we can use the workflow capabilities in Alfresco to go back to the teams that created this stuff and automatically ask for more information. So what that gives us, combining all of that together, we have a smart file plan. So we're starting to move away from this kind of vigorous structure, which has been well formed and is kind of there, to something that's a bit smarter and can actually, you know, do some bits for itself. Now, that's not to say, obviously, that we still can't have that very rigorous structure if that's what the requirement is, but it also means we've got this sliding scale of complexity where we can go from, you know, I guess the more hardcore kind of DoD kind of style view of a file plan right down to a more casual user who may just want to store their invoices on a monthly basis, you know, and just want to keep them for 7 years. So we can do a bit of both now. So I think we've got a couple of, just a couple of short videos which will show you this in action, similar to the stuff you would have seen this morning. Oh, sorry, I think I went too fast then. Which one am I on? Okay. So what we're going to do is have a look at case files. And you can see I've got, this is just a normal share site, and I've just managed my case files here. There we go, we've got the case file, the PDF, and the 3 images. So this is just your case file worker. He's doing his only job. And part of that job is obviously to mark a case as closed. Now, at this point, we're not doing anything special. This is just a normal content model, kind of customization with custom properties. But what you will have seen, as we've saved that, you can now see this thing has got its record ID, and it's actually become a record. And in a minute, we'll see how that happens. Obviously, that wasn't all of the parts of the case file there, so we've also got another mechanism where we can take that active folder, we can drop it into our case closed kind of structure, and as you see when we jump into here, you'll see that actually magically all of the files associated with that case have been automatically made a record for us. Yeah, oh sorry, you'll have to bear with me because I don't know how to pause it. Okay, I think I managed it. Sorry, go ahead.
How are these user actions that are occurring here, these all auditable?
Yes. I had to think then, but yes, they would be. Not out of the box because they are outside the scope of RM. So what happens is as soon as anything happens in the RM world, so as soon as you declare that as a record, anything that happens to that record is auditable. Where if you wanted to capture anything kind of, because when you tick case closed, that's kind of, at the borderline, it's on the content side. So that wouldn't automatically be captured, but it's obviously something that you could capture, you could configure to capture. No, so the movement from here to the file plan is captured, because that was obviously the first thing. That's kind of, we have declared this as a record, and from that point on would be. But if you wanted to capture actions that were happening to it before it was a record, then out of the box, no. But yes, you could in principle. Just try and, no, I'll just press play, I think. Okay. So I think what we're seeing here is we're now jumped into the file plan, and you can see the case folder has flown all the way through into the file plan into the relevant location. Okay, so these have been filed. Now, and I think we've got another example as well. Similar again. So we've got a social media site where we're concerned about all our media files. There's a couple of presentations, so we're going to go to our desktop, grab a presentation, dump it in there. I think we're going to do some more social publishing. So here we go. Because we want to get this out to the world, we dump it onto SlideShare. We want to, what are we going to do, Twitter about it. Okay, so we saw this morning. Interestingly, I think I need to talk to you about this, but you could also, in these examples, we add tags to trigger the record creation. There is actually no reason why we couldn't do that. Listen for the addition of that publishing aspect and trigger it on that, actually, which would, but that's part of the reason why we do the tag in here. So we're just going to tag that, and that in this world, that triggers the behavior to say, hey, you've tagged this thing, it's in SlideShare, I've got to keep a record of it. So we're just jumping into the file plan, and we'll see that thing has been filed, squirreled away in our communication file plan, right down here somewhere in our SlideShare. Okay. So the point we're trying to make here is that obviously you can see the user is just doing what they do, and record management happens to them. Okay. And yet we still haven't lost any of the control or structure that the records management team needs. So let me just move on, and I'll quickly show you just how some of that happens behind the scenes. So if we go into our customer care, our case files kind of working environment, you'll see we're going to have a look at the rules that have been created on these the folders, so we can get an idea for. I've run it again. My apologies. How do I go to the next one then? Sorry, Paul.
That's all right. I'll just my mouse. There you go.
Right. This is why I need Paul with me.
It's great at writing the problem.
Yeah, just don't ask me to. Don't ask me to run this. Okay. Okay, so we're just going to quickly look at the rules that have been managed on here. Again, stuff you may have seen this morning. So these are really business rules, right? We're saying if a case is closed, declare it as a record, right? And that's really all there is to it. So even for the guys creating the content rules in the content world, it's pretty easy. We should go, if we go and look at case closed, you'll see it's the same but slightly different. In this case, we're concerned about anything that's kind of dumped in this structure. So you'll see, here we go. If it's a subtype of case file, which is that folder, then set the case closed to true and declare it as a record. Okay, and that rule will be inherited down because we got obviously rule inheritance, much like a an inbox. And similarly, we can go and look at social media files. Again, same but different. Go and manage those rules, and you'll see if it's tagged with YouTube or Flickr or whatever, we're going to go and declare that as a record. And I say the other option here is to, has it got this aspect, which would I think we can do. I haven't tried it, but I think we can do it. Somebody was telling me the other day. So again, I think that the really important thing here is that we're able to kind of, think about what the business rule is around when we should create records and actually apply it, in UI, if you like, to our working environment. So here we've jumped into the file plan, and we're looking at now the records management rules, and we're saying things like, if it's a case file, automatically file it into this structure, and we can use these substitutions here, which are based on the context of the record. So we can actually kind of file things into structures that look at the metadata or the date. There you go, if it's a YouTube, put it into our marketing location here, Flickr, whatever. Okay, so again, the records management team are able to take their records management policy and kind of almost, you know, via UI, place it in. Here we go. Node.dm customer name. So we're actually using the customer name, which is attached to that record, which is part of your custom metadata, to drive where in the file plan that thing's going to be filed automatically. Okay. So very quick, just a couple of slides between me and lunch. So where are we going? So I think we can summarize this pretty easily in two fairly simple slides. So you'll have seen RM22 is coming soon, hopefully. And the theme for me is really blend and extend, which is, I think, was quite catchy. And the, you know, we've got these two pulls now. We've got ease of use, which is absolutely critical, because without that, we're never going to get this thing deployed in the real world. But at the same time, we have to, you know, keep an eye on this thing. And this is really, you know, it's as simple and the smart, the pulls of RM. So you'll see things like we'll be extending our in-place capability, so you'll be able to do in-place folders for a start. You may ultimately be able to do kind of in-place structures, so take snapshots of whole file plans and have them in your working environment. We talked about kind of electronic librarianship, so you can go and request, you know, if you're the CFO and you're working on the annual report and you want to see last year's financial records, being able to request via workflow, you know, can I see all these records? But instead of having to go to the file plan, actually having them kind of in place appear in your working environment, okay, and then them going away when you're finished with them. Another thing we've been talking about is in-place sort of relationship management. So when we're talking about versions of records, behind the scenes we have a fairly kind of complex relationship where we can sort of relate all these different versions of records together, and they can drive the disposition schedule. For the user, we can turn it into a sort of drag-drop affair where they can say, you know, this is the new version, and all the kind of smarts happens behind them, and they just see the new version become a record. Okay, so I think that's going to be a big driver for us going forward. And beyond that, in the maybe more the kind of 2.n, 3.0 time frame, I think the emphasis is going to turn towards us looking after electronic, and I put that underlined, records management. Obviously, we do that at the moment, but we do electronic document management. Okay, everybody thinks of electronic records as a document, you know, PDF, a spreadsheet, whatever. If you look at Alfresco, Alfresco is not document-centric. It is kind of, you know, bands of complicated relationships that define complex structure. And that's what we want to start managing in the future. And that will enable us to do things like look after entire Facebook feeds, look after entire web projects, treat them, or entire conversations, and treat all those things as kind of complex records made up of multiple bits of content, but disposable in their own right. So this is where we get all these kind of buzzwords around social records and hybrid records and complex records. So we can kind of mix, we can take our best-of-breed solution, which is allowing us to, you know, model content, you know, in your wildest dreams and apply process to it, and at the end of the day, being able to draw a band around it and say, these are the things we're interested in, and we want to manage that as a true electronic kind of record. Okay, so I apologize, I think we run over a little bit. But essentially, we will take any questions that you might want to ask us. We'll do our best not to give long answers so you can go and have some lunch.
I was going to say, I'll open it up for questions now. One of the things that I have the pleasure that I take this and I go around and I show this to prospects, I show this to customers. It's great because these guys do all the engineering work and I don't take all the glory and show them the product. And this is the first version of records management. People say, wow, you can do that?